Hi, this is Dr. Kurt Wohler for Autism Recovery System. We're going to talk about vitamin D and the vitamin D test. So Great Plains Laboratory has a vitamin D blood spot. Blood spot meaning it's a dried blood spot, a test that can actually be done at home. So having to do a blood draw for vitamin D is really unnecessary anymore, which is a huge boost to all of us, and particularly, as you know, as parents or caregivers, trying to do a blood draw on a child is not always easy. So what this test does is it breaks things down into what's called the optimal range. Now they're giving a reference range between 40 and 80 nanograms per ml. And then we got moderate deficiency and then low. And then of course we could certainly have levels that are too high, which on a baseline test honestly is pretty rare. Now we'll notice in this particular test, the level is actually quite low. So 17 on a vitamin D test is actually in a real deficient state. So vitamin D supplementation is certainly warranted. There is debate on what is the optimal range as far as vitamin D goes, and it can be different for different types of subsets of individuals. So typically what's used in the integrative health community is trying to get vitamin D levels above 50. I'll talk about that here. So the test also provides an interpretation of findings, and again, it gives some reference intervals, so severe deficiency, deficiency not optimal, and then what are sort of the optimal levels in a healthy population. And then, of course, if you're using international units, so here in the United States, we use nanograms per ml, but in other countries around the world, they'll usually use something like nanomoles per liter, so you can make that adjustment when you get the result. Now, when it comes to vitamin D, there's a couple things to keep in mind with regards to its overall function. And so we know it has a broad range of effects on immune system health, on helping to regulate calcium absorption in the body. But I want to just point out one interesting thing about vitamin D is that it does have an influence on serotonin levels. And we know that serotonin levels can often be imbalanced with individuals with special needs. So there's an enzyme called tryptophan hydroxylase. Tryptophan hydroxylase converts the amino acid tryptophan into something called 5-hydroxytryptophan, also called 5-HTP. That eventually becomes this 5-hydroxytryptamine, also known as serotonin. So serotonin has a beneficial role in the brain. It helps against depression, helps against anxiety when it's in an adequate state, etc. There was a very interesting paper that came out in 2014 talking about the role of vitamin D and its link to serotonin metabolism. And it turns out that there are two different types of tryptophan hydroxylase enzyme. There's tryptophan hydroxylase 1 and tryptophan hydroxylase 2. Tryptophan hydroxylase 1 is most active in the digestive system. So most of the serotonin that's actually produced in the body is actually produced in the gut. It has a role in gut contraction and peristaltic activity. It has a role in inflammation, and it also has a role in activating platelets to help with blood clotting. But the serotonin produced in the gut doesn't have any appreciable, at least known, crossover with serotonin that is produced in the brain and central nervous system. Tryptophan hydroxylase 2 is the form of this enzyme that is most active in the brain and nervous system. So it's almost as if brain serotonin is compartmentalized from serotonin produced in the rest of the body. And it's the vitamin D that regulates a specific, what's called a receptor element, that activates these enzymes. But what it does is the vitamin D controls a gene that has a regulatory effect on the way these enzymes work. So when we have adequate vitamin D levels, the tryptophan hydroxylase 1 activity in the digestive system is turned down. It's not turned off, but it's slowed down in its activity. So it brings the level of serotonin levels down in the gut. But at the same time, when we have adequate, optimal levels of vitamin D, the tryptophan hydroxylase 2, which is most active in the brain and nervous system, is increased. So we actually increase the ability to produce serotonin in the brain and nervous system. What they have found in autism is that many of the kids tend to have high levels of serotonin in the blood, but low levels of serotonin in the brain. And so vitamin D has a role in helping with this overall system. There's a lot of different suggestions that are thrown out there with regards to vitamin D dosing. The reality is you have to do testing, and the testing helps to guide where the levels truly are. Otherwise, we're just sort of estimating how much to use. On average, okay, and sort of an average dosing suggestion that tends to get put out there, and one of those comes from the Vitamin D Council here in the United States, is anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 international units per 25 pounds body weight. That would be a conservative dosing schedule. And you can convert pounds to kilograms by just dividing pounds by 2.2, so dividing 25 by 2.2 to convert it into kilograms. A more aggressive way of dosing for vitamin D, which also comes about from many of the same organizations, is approximately 300 IUs per kilogram per day. So that would typically be an aggressive dose. Now, at the time of the recording of this video, that's kind of what's out there. But, as medical research advances, etc., there can be other suggestions that may come forth. And so to really stay up to speed, if you want to, on the latest research and information, I'd encourage you to, periodically visit the Vitamin D Council's website. They have, there's a blog site and research articles because they do updated information. Generally, for adults, we're looking at, a 5,000 IUs per day, for example, and that tends to be what a lot of integrative health docs will tend to use in their practice. But again, vitamin D should really be tested on a fairly frequent basis. So it may be impractical to test every week, but trying to test it 3 or 4 times a year to kind of get a sense of what your child's vitamin D levels are doing is best. So, and certainly looking at vitamin D levels in the summer versus the winter, fall, spring, etc., is a good idea. We have a website called labtestplus.com. This is a website that actually allows people to access many of the tests from Great Plains Laboratory and others. So the vitamin D test is available from a dried blood spot from this website. So you can go to labtestplus.com, look at the menu of different options available, and each test that's ordered through the site also then will come with a written interpretation of findings and what are called action steps, suggestions on things to implement based on what the objective data is showing from that particular lab. I'm Dr. Kurt Wohler. Thank you so much for Autism Recovery System.